Okay, great. So our final speaker for today is Jacob Pryor, who's from Bristol City Council. So we heard, I guess, from weekend two that you had kind of a lot of outstanding questions still for the council. Questions around kind of what's already happening and kind of what's kind of already kind of committed to and in train, but also questions around kind of how resources can be prioritised and kind of what funding is available, and other issues like that as well. So we've got Jake with us to talk through some of that, and he's also going to be around to kind of support the rest of the weekend as well. So over to you, Jake.
Thanks, Tim. Morning, everybody. I'm just going to forewarn you that I've had a couple of internet dropout issues during the course of this already. So if I go static for 30 seconds, I will be back on as quickly as possible. So just bear with me if that happens. But yes, so yeah, I'm the Policy Bidding and Strategic Projects Team Manager at Bristol City Council in the transport team. And if you go to the next slide, please, Tim. So yeah, what I'm going to talk about today is just give you a bit of a recap on the livable neighbourhoods concept, and then I think a few of you were interested to know more about WECA's role in all of this, so I'll give you a very brief rundown of what WECA is and how it might play a part in this. Then talk about how this is all going to be funded from a council perspective, and then the tricky question of how we prioritise our investments across the city in livable neighbourhoods in a fair way. So Tim, if you go to the next slide, please. So yeah, just to kind of quickly recap, so livable neighbourhoods are essentially groups of residential streets that are bordered by distributed roads. So these are roads suitable for lorries, buses, and the main bulk of motor traffic. But they can also be by other typical barriers as well. So it might be rail lines, rivers, or canals. Typically speaking, they're about 15 minutes walk time from one edge to the other, so about 1 kilometre squared, but that can be give or take. And the basic sort of transport principle is that busy through routes are closed off to motor traffic and opened up for walking, cycling, and public transport through things like bus gates and better access to public transport stops. So yeah, the emphasis there on through routes that are closed off. Reducing volumes of motor traffic in neighbourhoods can, as you've heard through the last couple of weekends of speakers, provide really good opportunities for other things like more community space, tree planting, cycle hangers, parklets, wider pavements, play space, and lots and lots of other things. It is important, I think it is really important to stress that motor vehicle access is retained for residents. So you still have access to your property. It's about targeting the through traffic in these communities. And kind of on the back of Ellie's presentation there, you know, there's a real emphasis with local neighbourhoods on early and meaningful community engagement and co-design, so that communities are at the heart of shaping these decisions. I've made this next bit bold and underlined it to stress how important it is. We are here from transport, but livable neighbourhoods is not just a transport project. It has much, much wider implications. It's capturing a huge range of issues from air quality, safety, noise, lighting, public realm, biodiversity, to things such as social isolation, which Adrian Davis talked about, I think, in the second weekend, access to parks and green space, and so on. Next slide, please, Tim. So yeah, just a very, very quick overview of what WECA is. So WECA stands for the West of England Combined Authority, and that's constituted of Bristol Council, South Gloucestershire Council, and Bath and North East Somerset Council. WECA and those authorities still obviously work with North Somerset, but they're not officially part of the WECA crew, as it were. WECA is headed by the region's Metro Mayor, Tim Bowles, and he, in partnership with the other authorities, have been granted additional powers and funding over things like transport, housing, and education. It's really important to stress that decisions are agreed collectively in the way that WECA is set up, so rather than one body holding power over another. So it's not, you know, WECA saying this is how we want things done, nor is it Bristol saying this is how things should be done. It's a collective responsibility and it's collective decision making. As it's written down, WECA's main role is, and I quote, to develop policies for the promotion and encouragement of safe, integrated, efficient economic transport to, from, and within their area. What that means in practice is they're responsible with those other authorities and drawing up strategies, plans for the area to make sure our transport network is running as efficiently as possible. They also do have some additional functions, so they have powers over smart ticketing for public transport, for instance, the ability to do bus franchising, as well as strategic planning, so planning for homes and that sort of thing. So how does this sort of relate to livable neighbourhoods? Well, if Bristol wants to get funding for livable neighbourhoods, it needs to demonstrate to WECA and those other two authorities how livable neighbourhoods helps to meet those sort of sub-regional or much larger policy objectives around climate and air quality and health and so on. If it wants some funding to help deliver those projects, it will also need to demonstrate to WECA how livable neighbourhoods demonstrate good value for money investment. So that's the sort of key interplay there. If you go to the next slide, please, Tim. So one of the questions you're probably all asking is who's going to pay for all of this, this big project? So the first thing to say is that Bristol is developing a citywide strategy. In fact, I'm developing it, just started, to determine how much the Livable Neighbourhood programme could cost, as well as all the different sort of potential funding sources. The truth is that costs will be very, very variable from one area to the next, depending on the outcome of community engagement and the scale of improvements that communities want. So, if a community comes back, it's actually what we really want is just some double yellow lines to protect some junctions, a crossing over there and a couple of trees, and actually the rest of it we're pretty happy with, then you could be potentially looking at $500,000 per sort of kilometre squared. If a community comes back and they want more ambitious things or technically challenging things like segregated cycle routes, sort of sustainable urban drainage, junction improvements, then that figure can then rise along with that to $3 to $5 million per kilometre squared or more. So if you go to the next slide, please, Tim. It's important to note that livable neighbourhoods will be funded by a number of different sources, as with any major transport project. So that will be funding from WECA, it will be government competitive grants, so where Bristol's in competition with other councils to win a share of funding. It could be from developer funding, and it could be local funding, including prudential borrowing, although we're sort of quite limited on that. The graph to the right is a very, very, very indicative breakdown of our spend this financial year. Please don't quote me on any of this, but you can FOI me for the details if you want to go down a bit more granular. But this is just to give you an indication of what that money's been spent on. So the bit in blue there, which is about 19 million, that's the kind of funding that's used to maintain or renew or improve existing assets. So the highway is the council's biggest asset, and it costs a lot of money just to maintain it at status quo. The orange section there, which is about 7 million, that's where we have a little bit more flexibility, but it tends to be government grants that are quite specific. Or, it might be improving electric vehicle infrastructure, for instance, or improving a particular cycle lane. So that's from government and from WECA. The grey bit is essentially what is our annual allowance to do new things. So that's 3 million, so quite a small portion. In reality, a lot of that funding is actually spent on, again, renewing and maintenance and keeping programs going. So replacing traffic signals, for instance, providing cycle training. And so once you sort of take all of that into account, what we get at the start of each year to actually just do completely brand new things is a pretty tiny proportion of our overall budget. It's important to note that pie chart will change every single year. So this year we've got lots and lots and lots in maintenance and improving assets. But that's largely driven by things like Cumberland Basin, which is a very expensive project, which you've probably read about in the news. So typically that orange section will be a bit bigger, so more money from government grants and from WECA, and less in the blue section. But the grey section, our annual allowance every year, stays pretty much the same and is quite small, as I say, in comparison to other funding pots. So to go to the next slide, please, Tim. So this next slide is talking about, we know that we have those resources, and the next question is how do we prioritise those in a fair and even manner? So I think, as kind of Ellie touched upon in her presentation as well, what we want to avoid is just going where there is the loudest voices and where there's the most call for the livable neighbourhoods. And what we want to do instead is to encourage those unheard voices to sort of come forward, spread that investment across the city so that everyone can benefit from this, and critically use data to help inform our decision making. So next slide, please, Tim. So a question to the Assembly really is, which of these factors I'm about to show you now are relevant to prioritisation, and are some of greater importance than others? And should we use just one or a combination of these things? So if you go to the next slide, Tim. So should we be prioritising our resources based on areas of highest deprivation in Bristol? So should we be going to places like Philwood, Lawrence Hill, Hartcliffe, and those should be our priority? Next slide, please, Tim. Or should we be focusing on areas where people don't have access to a car and therefore need access to better alternatives, walking and cycling? So should that again be those areas in red where there is reduced access to a car or no access to a car within those households? Go to the next slide, Tim. Or should it be in areas where we have poor access to public transport? So that's the areas in blue and green, whereas the areas in red are well served by public transport. Or, next slide please, Tim, you're probably getting a theme here. Should it be based on accident clusters where we're getting the most collisions on our network and people are getting injured or harmed? And next slide please, Tim. So I'm rattling through these. Or should it be, as Dr. Adrian Davis was sort of stressing in his presentation, more about health? So the darker areas here are where people report as being overweight or morbidly obese. So is that where we should target our interventions? Or as I said at the start, is it a combination of all of those things and we need to overlay them and decide that actually it's a blend of all of those factors? And the last slide, please, Tim. So yeah, just some final thoughts really is that the type and timing of funding available to us is a limiting factor. So Bristol doesn't sort of sit on a pot of gold at the start of each year and decide where it's going to invest. Money sort of moves in rivers and streams, so it'll often be for very specific things, and we need to match our local policy objectives to whatever government's priorities will be at a given particular time. So funding is really unpredictable. But if we develop a strategy that will help us, if we can say to government, you know, this is what we're trying to achieve through livable neighbourhoods, this is how we're going to prioritise that investment, and this is what the outcome will be, then that will put us in a stronger position. Prioritisation is complex. There's lots of different factors and ways you could work out who should, you know, benefit from the livable neighbourhoods approach first. But I think it is important to be data-driven in that approach. So yeah, the question is thinking about those different data sets, how might the livable neighbourhoods approach might need to be adapted in different areas based on different needs in different areas. Yeah, that's pretty much it. So that's the end of my presentation.
Great.